Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 117, Quick Tips for Accuracy. Before we get to that, I have one quick tip to show you about batting. I've done a few bed runners for customers recently, and they're very long. Most of them are 100 inches or so, and you don't want to have to buy a queen or king size quilt bat to get the length of batting you need. If you take a throw size 60 by 60, cut it in half, and then sew the short sides together. I have a serger set up that I just serge batting all the time. So then you can get from a throw size bat, you can get a piece 120 by 30, which would cover the size of a bed runner. Now, you don't have to take a scissors and cut across this whole thing, or your rotary cutter to go measure in half and then cut. If you take your piece of batting, say this is your piece that you're going to cut in half here, you can just fold it up, put a ruler close to the edge, and slice across it. You lose this tiny little bit, but who cares? Because now you can serge these two ends together to get your long piece, or zigzag if you don't have a serger. But at any rate, just wanted to share that tip that you don't need to buy a queen or king size bat to do a bed runner and then have a whole huge piece left over. Now, let's get to the episode. I'm going to show you some tips for accuracy, and I'm using the log cabin as my first example. This is why I have this beautiful log cabin quilt behind me. Now, old patterns and some of the most prominent log cabin quilters, Judy Martin being one of them, says you must cut all your pieces to size first. And she actually doesn't cut width of fabric. She cuts off a 36 to 40 inch piece of fabric and cuts lengthwise across. Now, I don't do that, but this is traditionally the way people do log cabin quilts. You have a center square, and this can be bigger than the logs, or it can be as the same width as the log. It's just entirely the look that you want to achieve. But you sew your first log to the center square, the second, third, and fourth, and keep going. Here's my next round of logs. Then there's another round of logs, and then finally a last round of logs till you get to the final piece. That to me is too much cutting, and it also presumes that you sew perfectly 100% of the time around the whole square. I don't know anybody that sews perfectly 100% of the time. I think you maybe heard me say that before. The way I like to do it is I take a strip that's the log and a strip that's the center square, and I sew them together, and then I cut them apart in the width required. Then I get pieces like this, and I then sew these pieces to this log. Now, I usually add my logs clockwise, so when I add my piece to the log, my latest added log is to the bottom. Just as long as you maintain the same way all the way through. If you choose to add your logs counterclockwise, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with it, your log, latest added log, would be at the top as you add it onto the strip. You just need to remain consistent. So once I've got these sewn on, cut them apart, I add the next log, and cut this apart, add the next log, and keep going. Now, there are tools to help you. As soon as I finish down here, we'll get back to the table and I'll show you one of the tools and how it works. But you keep adding your strips and cutting apart and adding. Now, I didn't continue on past here because I ran out of space on the bulletin board, but here I still have to add the last red logs and the yellow log. Now, like I said, there are tools, and by all means, you don't need them. They make your life easier. You can do this with a regular ruler, but the ruler that I like to use is the Creative Grids log cabin tool. And this is the 8-inch version. There's a 10-inch version that's called the Log Cabin Trim Tool Duo, and there's a 12-inch version. You don't need to see them because we're not going to use them for this example. But let me take a couple pieces off the board and show you how this works to help you cut. This is the log cabin trim tool that I like, and it's got 3 center squares. And if you recall, on the final block, I have 3 rounds of logs being added. So the first round, this one's in the center, the second round, this one's the center, and the last round is the center. So what this lets you do is, if you haven't sewn perfectly right, when you trim, you'll be able to make it perfect. So let me move this. And now I'm putting this first center square on the center square, and then I trim. And the instructions in this quilt for this ruler is you can use strips that are wider than you need. Now, I used 1.5 in this example, but if you use a little bit bigger, then you would be trimming a little bit more off of the top and sides. And that's okay. I have done one where I used all scraps, so there were varying widths. And now it's ready to go. You add your four strips and you trim. Now, I didn't pull out one for the middle trim because I think you can get the idea from the first and the last trim. So here's the last block. There we go. And so now I'm using the center, the last one for the centering square here. So here's where my block should be. And then we trim this off. And this takes care of everything if you have not sewn perfectly all the way around. Oop, I didn't quite get that off. Let me try one more time here. It's not at the best angle. Now, again, like I said, by all means, you do not need this ruler to do this. As long as you know where all the lines are on your ruler, you can make sure that you trim this perfectly. What's nice about this ruler is it doesn't have any extra lines that you have to worry about. Only the lines that you need are on here. So it just makes it easier. But you can do it with just a regular ruler. The other thing that's nice about this, and I want to point this out real quick before we move on. Let's say you had too big of a seam allowance on this one, so that this yellow was in a little further. When you trim, this yellow and this red will be at the right distance. So then when you sew your rows together, or blocks together, I should say, you know that where the measurement should be from where you cut, not from something that's in a little too far. It's easy to cut off the part that's out too far, but not when it's in too far. So it just makes it so that you can correct mistakes as you go without pulling and easing in and making little pleats or bubbles. So I find this method to make my life easier. Besides, I love making log cabins. Let's just switch out. I have another example to show you. The method of adding your units to strips rather than cutting all your pieces individually, it can be used in many different applications, not just the log cabin. Here's the Ursula Reich's quilt book that I've used for so many years for baby quilts. And one quilt that I've made many, many times has you cut squares, then cut 4 different frame pieces to do all 4 sides of the square, all individually, and then sew them together. That makes no sense to me. When I make this quilt, I take a strip of my focus fabric that's going to be my square, and I take 2 strips of frame pieces, sew them to both sides of the center square. So here's the other side when you press it out, but looks like this before you press it. Then I cut my squares into the 7-inch pieces that they tell you to cut. That to me is so much easier than cutting 6 7-inch pieces of this, 6 7-inch pieces of this, 6 7-inch pieces of this, and sew them all together. This to me, in my opinion, is much more efficient. Then I take my pieces that I've cut from here and add a strip on this side and a strip on this side, and then I get the framed square that is the basis of my block. And then I trim to size. So this would now be 8 inches because, as you know, 7 becomes 6.5. These are 1 1/4, so they become 3/4. So 6.5 plus, oh boy, that was tough, plus 1.5, which is 3/4 and 3/4, becomes 8. So we are now cutting 8.5-inch pieces for here. But of course, I didn't do it that way. I added strips. So again, we just trim to size. If anything is off a little bit, here's an example where you can see what I was trying to show with the log cabin on the table. If this was too narrow, these would be cut correctly. And when you're putting your things together, you know which is correct and which is incorrect, and you can adjust for it and fix it. Now, you can't be a 1/2 inch off because then something's really wrong. But if it's a sliver, you can fix it. So I like this method for accuracy and efficiency. Those are the tips for today. Let's find out who won. Valerie. The winner of Valerie is Susan Rich Tarsick, I think it is, Tarcick, 5672. Please send me your mailing address to quiltersheaveninc@gmail.com and I will get it out to you. Let me show you this week's. This one I made many years ago. I saw a quilt at a quilt show. I can't remember if it was Houston or if it was at the Donald E. Stevens Center in Rosemont. Not quite sure. Let me hold it this way so you can see that way. I'm calling it concentric rectangles. I saw this quilt at a quilt show, or a quilt. I took a picture of it and kind of made my own version of it. It's been sitting in the pile for years. I haven't gotten it quilted yet. I'd love to give it to somebody who wants it, will quilt it and finish it. So if you would like this to finish, please comment on the video, put concentric rectangles in the comment, like my video, and subscribe to my channel, and you will be entered to win. That's this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy sewing.